intro to, thanks for starting the recording. So yeah, quick recap. Last week, we had a quick intro to R and RStudio itself. Three things that we learned. R is a language that's used for statistical computing and graphics. RStudio is a very popular interactive development environment for R. And GitHub is a platform that people can use to store, manage their code, and share it with others. Now, what we didn't have time for last session is to cover or is to introduce the topic of packages. So packages contain code, documentation, and sample data in a standardized format that can be installed by different R users. And what makes packages special is that they can enhance base R, which is what's available to you when you first boot up RStudio, by providing specialized tools for various tasks. And one meta package, which is basically a collection of popular packages that is well known and widely used, is called tidyverse. And this contains functions, documentation that is specifically designed for conducting data science. And today we're going to be taking a closer look at two of the packages that fall within this tidyverse meta package family. The first is called dplyr, and it's going to be used for data manipulation, so we can wrangle our data to make it a specific way before we pass it to ggplot, which is another package that's part of tidyverse that contains things specific to data visualization. And here's a more comprehensive list of all the tidyverse packages. Okay, so yeah, I guess like diving into ggplot. In the ggplot2 book, like the official reference guide, if you want to call it is defined as a system for declaratively creating graphics based on what's called the grammar of graphics. You basically provide the data, and then you tell ggplot how to map variables to what are called aesthetics, what type of graphical primitives you want to use, and it takes care of all of the details for you. Now, we're throwing out a couple of new words like variables, aesthetics. I'll make sure to cover all of that as we go through the different ggplot2 functions. Okay, so if you are following along the Quarto document, you will see a code chunk called load package. Oh, and as a side note, if your Quarto document looks a little different from mine, it may be because you have source selected. I have visual selected here, so it gives me a prettier, almost rendered version of the text and the pictures integrated, similar to how you would, write a document in Google Doc or Word, for example. So we're first going to start by loading the packages that we'll be using today. So we are going to use the packages from the tidyverse. And in order to do that, I am going to use the library function. And I am going to pass tidyverse into it as an argument. Once I've done that, I can press this green arrow, or you can also use the keyboard shortcut, which is Command Enter or Control Enter, depending on whether you're on a Windows or a Mac. I might just take a quick second to check the chat while people are loading the packages. In terms of saving the files, you explicitly need to export the files. Like whatever you save in the cloud is going to be gone in 2 weeks, basically. Okay. Now, hopefully you get a message that looks something like this that basically informs you that you have made packages like dplyr and ggplot available in your workspace. So now we have the ability to use functions that belong in these packages. And as a side note, you only need to install a package once, typically onto your machine, but you need to reload it every single time you start a new R session. So if I were to refresh my R session right now, I would have to reload tidyverse if I want to start using the dplyr and ggplot2 functions. Now let's take a bit of time to explore our sample data. So the sample data that we'll be using today originally comes from SNCF, which is France's national state-owned railway company. So we're going to be looking at train data. And if you want to see the original CSV, you can just click on the hyperlink, but we'll be using a modified, truncated version just for brevity. So the next thing that we want to do is read in the data. To do that, we're going to be using a function called read CSV. And this function comes from the readr package, which also belongs to the tidyverse universe. And read CSV allows you to take a CSV that's sitting in your directory and load the contents into your workspace. So if I pop over to the files pane, I see that I have a file called French-trains.csv. And by doing this and hitting enter, or pressing the green arrow or pressing Control Enter, I am able to see the data. And in order for me to be able to use it for downstream analysis, I am gonna save it to a variable called data. So I'll just run that again. Okay, and then if I type data down here, oops, I should see that it returns a data frame. Okay. So next, I'm just going to observe a snippet of the data dictionary that I pulled from the location that the CSV file was originally sitting. And the data dictionary just provides a summary of the variables that are contained in this data frame, as well as the types that we discussed last class. In addition, that's annoying. Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry, I just have to run mine again from the top because it disconnected. Okay, I should be good now. Okay, yeah, so I'm just looking at this data dictionary here, and we can see that we have variables like year and month, which are doubles, and some variables like the name of the departure station and the name of the arrival station that are of type character. Now, in order to kind of get our hands on the data and to figure out what's going on, what we can do is use two functions, one called head and one called tail, to inspect the top and bottom rows of the data. So by using the head function and passing our data into it, you can see that it pulled up the first 6 rows of the data. So it's not an overwhelming amount of information to look at. And we can see that if we look at the first row looks like it's capturing information on train journeys from Aix-en-Provence to Paris-Lyon for the month of January in 2015. And I apologize for my French pronunciation. I'm doing the best I can. And similarly, if you want to check, inspect what the last few rows of the data looks like, we can use the tail function and similarly pass in our data. And then that's going to return the last 6 rows of our data frame. So it seems like looking at the last row, it is capturing information on train journeys that took place from Zurich, Switzerland to Paris, Lyon for the month of November in 2018. And this is just showing the first 6 columns, but you can use the arrow to inspect the columns that are currently not being shown, basically. Okay. Any questions here? Don't think I see too many questions in the chat. I think they're being handled nicely by the other co-host. Okay, so I think I'm just going to dive in and we can start with our first plot of the day, the histogram. So let's create a histogram to visualize the distribution of average journey type, which is a numeric variable. In order to do that, I am first going to type the name of my data variable. And using the pipe, something that we also discussed last week, so that's the percentage sign, the greater than symbol, and the percentage sign. Alternatively, you can use the base pipe, which is the bar followed by a greater than sign. Either way, your keyboard shortcut is going to be Command, Control, and hold on, sorry, Control, Shift, and M. And using the pipe, I am going to pass this data variable into a function called ggplot. And in my and in the ggplot function, I am going to pass in an argument, which is like an input, the AES function that we use to specify our aesthetics, basically letting the function know which variable I want along the x-axis, y-axis, and so on. So in this case, since I want to visualize the distribution of the average journey time, I am going to pass in the name of that variable. And once I start typing it, you can see that auto complete helps me pull up the right variable name. So I have journey time underscore, journey underscore time underscore average. And I am just going to press Control Enter to run that. Okay, so now I'm seeing an empty plot. I have some axis labels and an x-axis title, but I'm not seeing any of my data yet. And in order to do that, I'm going to use the plus sign. And in a new line, type geom histogram. So this is basically telling ggplot that I want to create a histogram using the specified data that I've specified to it. And if I press the green arrow or press Control and Enter after adding that geom histogram line, you can see that you now have a plot visualizing the distribution of average journey time. And from this plot, you can see that the distribution is slightly right skewed. Yeah, in terms of like double character, the language around data types, journey type is a double, or what we call a numeric here, because it contains numbers ranging from probably somewhere around like 20 all the way up until it looks like almost 500. as opposed to words like apple, banana, cantaloupe, things like that. Okay. So that was a little piece of code that we wrote to create a histogram. And by doing that, we can see that creating a plot is almost like building a layered cake, where all the plots begin with a call to ggplot. I'm just going to close this for a second. ggplot, and then you supply it with the default data, and then you specify your aesthetic mappings with the AES function, and then you create additional layers using the geom function that specifies what kind of plot you want to make, and then you're adding all these components together with a plus sign. Okay. So moving on to a scatter plot. So let's try creating a different type of plot. So we can try making a scatter plot to visualize the relationship between average journey type, which is what we saw a numeric variable, and average arrival delay, which is also a numeric variable. So just like what we did last time, we're first going to start with our data. But since I think for this plot, I want to only visualize rows with a positive arrival delay. So in order to filter for those rows, I can use a function called filter. And filter belongs to the dplyr package, and it allows us to filter rows that satisfy certain conditions. So in order to keep only the rows with positive delay, I am going to choose average delay all arriving, which contains average arrival delay. So I want to make sure that the value of average delay all arriving is greater than 0. And then that should return rows, only the rows with a positive delay. So I can just quickly glance to make sure, yeah, I am not seeing any negative numbers in here. That looks good to me. And then now that I've filtered my data in a way that satisfies me, I can pipe that filtered data into ggplot. And just like last time, we're going to pass the aesthetics function as an argument to specify what we want to place on our x and y variables. So on my x variable, I want journey time average, which is the average journey time. And then on my y variable, I want average delay all arriving. Okay. So if I press the green arrow or command enter, once again, I'm seeing that I have a blank plot. It looks like the right variables are showing up along my x and y axes. Now it's just time to get the points on there. Now, last time we typed plus geom histogram, but this time we're not creating a histogram, we're creating a scatter plot. So the function that we want to add here is geom point. And after I've added geom point and I've pressed either the green arrow or command enter, I can see that I have a scatter plot right in front of me. And visually inspecting this, it looks like the variance of delay, so like how wide, I guess, yeah, the spread of data. So the variance of delay seems to increase as the average journey time increases. So maybe it's just that, things can go really wrong if you have a 4 or 5 hour journey. And for journeys that average less than an hour, so around less than 60 minutes, the arrival delay tends to be less than 10 minutes long. Sorry, my cat is interrupting. Meanwhile, for journeys that average 5 hours, the delays seem to be around less than 30 minutes. So, less than 10 minutes, less than 30 minutes, we have a pretty wide variation at either ends. Oh yeah, I see someone in the chat. Uh, make sure that you are specifying X and Y using the equal sign, not a dash. And I think that should fix your problem. Okay. Another thing that we can do is change the look and feel of this plot. So I'm just going to copy and paste the code chunk that we've created here into this code chunk down here. And we can change the look and feel of the scatter plot by providing different arguments to the geom point function. So the first thing I might want to do, okay, so as a reminder, this is what my plot looks like right now. Maybe I want to change the opacity of my plot. So there's a lot of points that are hanging out in this bottom left corner of my plot. And it's it might be easier to see how they're distributed if I change the transparency of my points. So in order to change the transparency or opacity, I am using the alpha argument. And alpha, I believe, spans from 0 to 1. The closer it is to 0, the more transparent it is. The closer it is to 1, the more opaque it is. So maybe I want something around like 0.25. And again, control enter, rerunning that cell. And yeah, and you can see that it's a little bit easier to distinguish the individual points as opposed to when it was completely opaque. It just looks like a big black blob down there. Okay. Another thing that we can do is to change the point size. So maybe we want to make our points a little bit smaller for some reason. In order to do that, I can use the size argument, again, passing it into geom point. So I think the default size is 1. If I want to make it smaller, maybe I want to use 0.8. If I run that again, you can tell that it shrunk the point size a little bit, and you can try playing with the numbers as well to see how that changes. And maybe I'm not a huge fan of this monochromatic plot that I've created. Don't worry, you can also change the color of the point as well. There's a couple different ways to do it, but probably the easiest way is to just specify the name of the color. So if I want to change my points to red for some reason, I can pass in the character red enclosed in quotes. And you can tell that I've set it up correctly because the IDE is basically telling me that, oh, this is the it's showing me the color that I expect to get once I run this. I see a question in the chat. Alpha specifies the opacity. So how dark or how see-through your point is. Okay, going back to color, I can run this. Okay, it's not very pretty, but you can see that it changed the points to red. A different way you can do this is to specify a hex code. Perhaps you've used 8 or 6-digit hex codes before, but it's basically just a character mishmash of letters and numbers that help you specify a color. So I am going to use this color. I've shared it in the chat in case it's easier for you to copy and paste. So if I want to use that hex code, again, I'll just wrap it in quotes, and you can see the color that I expect to get once I run this. And that kind of changes the plot to a more purpley color. So you can use words or hex codes to specify colors if you want to be more specific. And just because Tidyverse was or has, I guess, Lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. And every time you see a color variable in ggplot, I believe that it accepts both the American and the British and or Canadian spelling. So don't worry about accidentally misspelling it. It should handle both OR and OUR on most occasions. Okay. Yeah, and maybe what I can do here is save this scatter plot that I've created into a variable called scatterplot. Oops. Using the assignment operator. I'll just run that again. Okay. And then next thing that we can try doing is to change the title and the axis label so we can make our plot convey more information. So I have the scatter plot that I created in the above code chunk. And in order to modify, edit things, you can continuously add different ggplot functions to your plot. You can layer them. And we're going to layer it on with a function called labs, which allow you to manipulate the labels and make sure that you're using the plus sign, not the pipe here. And labs takes on a few different arguments. First thing that we'll use is the title argument. Maybe here we want to write something like average arrival delay versus average journey time. Make sure you wrap it in quotes. And you can see that the title has appeared on my plot. And maybe I want to convey to the reader the date range that was used to produce the plot. So I know that the minimum and maximum dates in this data frame, I believe, are January 15, November 18. So I can add a subtitle to convey that additional note. And you can see that it shows up below your title. And maybe I want to make my X and Y axis labels a bit more informative. So my X is average journey time, and I'll provide the units as well. It's in minutes. And my Y-axis label, I want it to be average arrival delay, and that's also in minutes. Yeah, so for every label that you're creating, make sure you're wrapping it in quotes and you are separating it using a comma. Yeah, and after I've done that, I see that I've updated the title, subtitle, and XY labels on my plot. Is it possible to stack X letters vertically? Like to have like A, V, G, R, R, I, V, A, L, like that? I think so. I think your best bet would be to, I don't know off the top of my head, but if you do question mark labs, it should pull up the documentation. Oops. It should pull up the documentation for this function, and or string R, which is another package that belongs to the tidyverse, has a lot of great functions for manipulating strings. So it might be of your interest to also look at this as well to see if you can control if you can control the way that the text is displayed onto your plot. Yeah, if scatter sct underscore plt is not found, if you got an error like that, make sure that somewhere above, like where you're trying to change the title and the axis labels, you've assigned your previous plot to a variable of that name, and make sure that you've run it, like you've executed this code chunk so that R knows or that you have defined sct underscore plt. Okay. So moving on to our third plot of the day, we're doing line plots next. So we are looking particularly at a city called Brest, which is a port city in Brittany in northwestern France. And what we want to do next is to create a line plot to show how the monthly number of trips from Paris to Brest fluctuates or changes throughout the year. So just give me 1 second. Could a couple of people that are following along the tutorial just tell me whether or not you're able to see a column named new date? It should be the very last column that appears in the data that you've loaded. Yes. Okay, great. So no need to manipulate it. We'll just dive straight into plotting. Oh, yeah, I see that there's a hand. I can answer that question real quick before we move on. Could you unmute yourself? Joseph?
Hey, Reiko, I
yeah.
disabled, just because we're a large group, I disabled the ability to unmute yourself. So if people wouldn't
Okay.
mind just dropping their questions in the chat instead.
Okay, yeah, sure. We can do that instead. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. Yeah, so I'll just wait for that question to come into the chat, and I'll just move on to creating a line plot instead. All right, so we have our data here. Now, this time we're only looking at trips that happened from Paris to Brest. So once again, we want to filter our data to make it more specific to, I guess, the research question that we're trying to answer, or the plot that we're trying to generate. So once again, we're going to use the filter function from the dplyr package. And this time I'm specifying 2 conditions. The first being, I want my departure station value to be I am just going to copy and paste that into the chat so it's easier for you. So this I know just because I did a bit of digging around before creating this workshop. So I know that trains that depart from Paris to Brest depart from a very specific station in Paris called Montparnasse. So that's what I want my departure station value to be. And then similarly, we're going to specify the arrival station of interest. In that case, that's going to be Brest. And again, R is case sensitive, so make sure that you are capitalizing the station names as, since that's the way that they appear in our data. So I'm just going to press Control Enter, execute the cell to make sure that, yeah, it looks like my filters worked. I'm only seeing those 2 station names in my data. Looks good. Now it's time to pass it to the ggplot function. Again, we're going to start off with the AES, the aesthetics function. This time I want to see how the number fluctuates throughout the year. So I want the time dimension to be along my x-axis. So this is new date is just a column I made in order for this workshop to run a bit more smoothly, which is a date column derived off of year and month. And then Y, I want the total number of trips. So if I run that, okay, it looks like I have the right variable names along my X and Y axis. Now this time, instead of using geom histogram or geom point, I am going to use geom line. Now if I run that, okay, so it looks like the number kind of hovered around 200 trips per month between 2015 and 2017. There seemed to have been a big dip before it went all the way up to 400 trips a month, probably around June or July of 2027. And then it seems to maybe be hovering around 250, 300 since that peak. And I'm seeing a question on the chat, is the filter cumulative? So yeah, it is cumulative. By using the comma, I'm basically specifying that I want rows where the departure station is Paris and the arrival station is Brest. If I wanted to use an or condition for whatever reason, you could use the bar. But then that would return departure station is Paris Montparnasse or arrival station is Brest. So that wouldn't be helpful in answering our question here. Yeah, in terms of the plus and the pipes, I tend to think of it as the pipes help you chain the different wrangling operations that need to take place. But once your wrangled, manipulated data goes into ggplot, then from there you're adding all the additional ggplot components using a plus sign. So you'll notice that like once I start adding components to my plot, you would rarely see me go back to use the pipe. I don't think you would. I don't think I can actually. Yeah, I think once I switch over to the plus sign, then I'm just adding additional components using a plus sign. Okay. So just for the interest of time, I think I am not going to bother adding titles, subtitles. You've all seen how we can do that in the previous example. So let's move on to the next line plot. So this time I want to create a line plot to show how the monthly number of trips from Paris to multiple cities in Brittany, so multiple cities in that northwestern corner of France, fluctuate throughout the year. So again, I just did a little bit of digging around before this. I know that this data set contains 3 cities that belong in Brittany. One is Brest that we just looked at. Another one is called Rennes, and another one is called Campe. And I am going to type those 3 city names as a character vector, like so. And I am gonna assign it to a variable called Brittany cities, so it's easy for us to use it down the road. Now I'm just gonna run that code chunk. So if I type Brittany cities, yeah, it returns a character vector that I've defined. Okay. So as usual, we're gonna start with our data. And this time, similar to what we did last time, we want to make sure that our departure station is Paris Montparnasse. And this time, not only do we want the arrival, or this time it's a little bit different because you're not looking for just one arrival station. You want an arrival station value of either Brest, Rennes, or Campe. And in order to specify that, what we can do is use this, I believe, operator called in. So this basically only returns rows where the value of arrival station is one of Brest, Rennes, or Campe. So I'm just going to run that. Okay, and then I'm seeing Paris for all of my departures, and then one of the 3 stations for my arrival station. Okay, so I think I've done all the filtering that I want to do. So you guessed it, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pipe that wrangled data into the ggplot function. So the thing I want along my x-axis isn't going to change. I still want the time dimension to be along my x-axis. So I'm going to use a new date variable. And once again, I am plotting, or I'm trying to show how the monthly number of trips fluctuate throughout the year. So I want total number of trips to be along my y-axis again. And now this time I want to show how it differs for the 3 cities. So I want to create a different line for each one of those cities, specifically lines of different color. Now we can specify that by using a new argument in AES called color. And I want basically a different line for each arrival station. So that's how I'm going to set up my ggplot. Again, just running that to make sure, seeing no errors. I'm seeing the right variables along my X and Y. And then we can just use the same geom as last time, geom line. And then boom, I'm seeing 3 lines of different colors. And I see a little legend on the right-hand side as well that tells me which line contains information for which city. And again, for the interest of time, I don't think I am going to, oh no, I think I'll just change the X, Y, and legend labels here. So again, going back to the labs function that we saw earlier, let's change the label that we have along the x-axis. So new date isn't really helpful. I think in this case, it's pretty self-explanatory what we're trying to show along the x-axis. So maybe I want to remove new date. A quick and easy way to do this is just to pass an empty character. And you can see that new date is now gone. And maybe I want to make the label along my Y a little bit more informative. So I can write monthly count instead, maybe. And let's change the way that the legend for the label for the legend looks. Let's change how that looks. So to change that, we are going to use the color argument, since like you basically want it to match what you have up here. So we want color to show maybe arrival station instead. Okay, and then you can see that it changed the title or the label for the legend section as well. Yeah, I'm just gonna look at the chat. Oh, okay, quick question. Yeah. Okay, answer that question. Another thing that we can do is change the way that the dates are displayed along the x-axis. So we can manipulate how the scale appears by using a function called scale x date. So this basically means that we want to change the scale along the x-axis, and that our x-axis contains a variable of type date. Now, there are various arguments that you can specify. So I recommend that you look at the documentation for these scale functions, but today I just want to change it. So maybe I have a break every 6 months, and then I just want it to be a little bit more informative. So these are basically just shortcuts saying I want like an abbreviated label of the month followed by the year. So you can see that the labels now occur every 6 months instead of every year, or the ticks like occur every 6 months instead of every year, and that they're a little bit more informative now that they have the month included. And we can also maybe change the y-axis so that it starts like right at the origin 0, 0. We can do that by using scale y continuous. So we're using scale y continuous here because we want to change the y-axis, and the variable that's contained in the y-axis is of type numeric, which is a continuous variable. So instead of whatever min and max values we have along the axis right now, I want to change my limit to maybe start at 0, go all the way up to 700. And then I'm just going to add another argument called expand to help me like see the origin more clearly, I believe. And boom, you can see that the y-axis now starts right, or the plot now, no, the y-axis starts at 0. Okay. Now just inspecting this graph, you might wonder like, okay, why does Rennes have the most frequent service compared to the other places? And it happens to be that these trains departing from Paris, I'm just going to switch over to a map. These trains departing from Paris go to Rennes and then split up to go to either Brest or Quimper, which explains why you see more trains going to Rennes and about the same number of trains going to the two different destinations. Okay, so I think we have a bit of time to explore the bar plot, which is the last type of plot that we're going to be looking at today. Stepping away from Brittany a bit, now we're going to look at Gare du Nord, which is officially one of the busiest railway stations in Europe by the total number of passengers that it sees. And let's try creating a bar plot to show the number of departures from this station in 2015 by destination. So I'm gonna delete that. So again, starting with my data. Now I want to use the filter function from the dplyr package again. And this time I want my departure station to be Paris Nord. And I only want to plot the departures from 2015. So I can add that condition to return the relevant rows. So I'm going to press Control Enter or the green arrow just to make sure I've captured the right rows. Just going to flip through it quickly. Okay. Looks like I have Paris and 2015. So looks like the filter worked. Great. Now I want to show the number of departures by destination or by arrival station. So I'm going to use another function from dplyr called groupBy, and I'm going to pass in the name of the variable arrival station. So this is going to allow me to do the by destination computation later. So I'm going to call it groupBy. Okay, it doesn't look like it changed anything, but you'll see next. But you'll see like what happens after we do this next step. And what we want to do is get the total number of departures for each destination. So we want to get the sum of the total number of trips. And I'm just going to store this statistic in a new variable called n. And then now you can see that you have the number of departures from Paris to each one of the destinations in 2015. And yeah, I think we are now ready to pass this to ggplot. Okay, so to create a bar plot, we want the names of the arrival stations or the arrival stations to go along the x-axis. And then we want the total number to be along the y. So just making sure that my column names are being mapped correctly. I'm going to press Control Enter. Okay, so I'm seeing a blank plot, but it looks like I have the right variables plotted along the y and x. And then this time I am going to use a different geom called geom bar, which allows me to create a bar plot. And I'm going to pass an additional argument called stat set to the value identity. And that basically just controls how I believe the number that we have here is like interpreted under the hood and displayed in the plot. And yeah, you now have a bar plot that shows the number of departures from Paris to the 4 different destinations that you can get to from there. Okay, so just for the interest of time, I think I might skip the last one, and then we can come back to it in part 2 of ggplot. I'm wondering if there's any questions in the chat that I should answer. Do we need to use the word mapping after ggplot? Like the aesthetics, if you're referring to the aesthetics function, the AES function, yeah, you do need to, I believe you do need to use the aesthetics function to basically specify what you want along your Y and X. Yeah, in terms of sorry, and I have another question asking why I'm using equal. That is the equality operator, and that basically checks whether a particular row in my data or a particular value in my data is equal to 2015. And if it is equal to 2015, it returns true. If it's not equal to 2015, it returns false. And filter basically works so that it only returns the rows that it gets a value of true for. In terms of defining the, do you mean like okay, I have a question asking how do you define the pipe tag? If you mean how do you, like what the shortcut for that is, it's either Control Shift M or Command Shift M if you're on a Mac. And you can use that shortcut to quickly get it. Not sure if that answered your question though, sorry. Okay, any other questions? Oh, shortcut for Windows for the pipe. It's Control Shift M. Okay, yeah, I guess if we don't have any other questions, we can give back 2 minutes of your afternoon or your morning or wherever you are. Just as another reminder, the next session, Introduction to Data Visualization Part 2, is going to be on Thursday, February 22nd at the same time. So Thursday, 2 weeks from now. And we're just going to dive a little bit further into the different ggplot 2 functions and features, as well as get more comfortable with the different dplyr functions again. Yeah, and I was just asked to show the code for the bar plot again, so I will do that. Yeah, okay. I think the last question I'll take maybe is how to find how to export your Posit Cloud space. So if I go to my Posit Cloud environment, or like if I select all content through the R-Ladies Ottawa space, I just need to find my own. Okay, I believe if you, oh, I think it's this button, this download button. If you click on that, that'll allow you to pull all of the content that you've created in the cloud. Okay, and then someone asked where the recordings will be available. We're still working on editing or pulling and editing the recordings from the last session. Once that's been edited and like ready to be uploaded, it should be available on the R-Ladies global YouTube channel. Yeah. Do the other hosts want to take a stab at the other questions? Maybe
I
in
think
terms of, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say I do have to run right at 1, but maybe it's something we could address in the next session if it's still like a big issue.
For sure. Yeah, okay. The last thing maybe is, oh yeah, if you have to go, see you later. I'll just answer this last question about maybe where people can ask questions. So we do have a GitHub repository. If you do have a GitHub account, you could, yeah, I think you could like create an issue here and post your question, and then it'll be visible to us. You can answer it in the GitHub issue or bring it up maybe at the next session. Okay, so it's top of the hour, so I think we are gonna go. Yeah, that'll be the end of the session. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.